Today I'm going to look at the signs in Taurus in the Indian zodiac, known as the nakshatras. Taurus is the second sign of the zodiac, and in the way that Aries is the first sign and represents the most masculine energy or yang energy of all of the 12 zodiac signs, Taurus represents the most feminine because it's an earth sign, which is a feminine element. It is fixed, which is the feminine modality or triplicity, and it is ruled by Venus, which is feminine and represents beauty and sensuality. So, as you can see here, within Taurus, we have 3 nakshatras. The first 10 degrees of Taurus is covered by Krittika. The next 13 degrees and 20 minutes is covered by Rohini. And the last 6 degrees and 40 minutes, or 6 2/3 degrees, is covered by Mrigasharsha. So we have these 3 nakshatras. The only nakshatra which is covered completely within Taurus is Rohini, and we will see that is the one that covers the essence of Rohini. Krittika began in Aries, which we covered the first pada of, or the first 3 and 1/3 degrees of in the last video on Aries. So the second, third, and fourth padas, or last 3/4 or 10 degrees of Krittika, is covered in Taurus. And this is the chart of Amma, or Ammaji, the Indian saint who hugs hundreds of people a year and has done that for a decade, at least prior to COVID. This was her main service to the world. And she transmits beautiful spiritual energy by doing this, that is healing to people and uplifting spiritually. And so Moon is exalted at the beginning of Taurus. It's exalted in Krittika. The reason is Taurus is the feminine sign, and it represents fertility, abundance. It represents the fixed earth principle. It's the enjoyment of the material world. And the moon is reflecting the light of the sun, the brightest of all the planets. Krittika is ruled by the sun. So for the moon to be in Krittika at the beginning of Taurus, it is reaping the benefits of the sun, of the masculine initial fiery energy that we went through in Aries. The cardinal fire is now being fully received, and the benefits of it are being fully appreciated and reaped. Amma, she's a conduit for the energy of the divine, of God, of the solar principle of reality itself. And that moon in the beginning of Taurus, in the 8th house of mysterious spiritual energy, is being fully reflected. Amma does not claim to be a source of the energy that she shares. She's very much of the path of bhakti, which is the path of surrender and devotion. And at her gatherings and ceremonies, there's a lot of traditional Indian practices of devotion and surrender that go along with those meetups that she hosts around the world. So this is a perfect example of an exalted moon in Taurus, an exalted moon in Krittika through Amma. Next, we have something very different, which is taxi driver. And I'm always feeling into these in the moment. This isn't memorized intellectual knowledge that I'm sharing. So I'm feeling into this thing in the moment of what I see in the chart, what I feel through the energy of the person. In this case, this is happening between me and the movie and the chart, and also the archetypes of the signs themselves that I'm wishing to educate in this series. I'm wishing to educate on the meanings of these signs, both the Western 12 zodiac signs. Today we're looking at Taurus, and the Indian signs known as the nakshatras, today including Krittika, Rohini, and the first half of Mrigasharsha. So now we have the moon and the part of fortune together at the beginning of Krittika. Let me confirm part of fortune's degree down here. So part of fortune actually shows up in Aries at 28 degrees and 17 minutes, which puts it in the first pada of, okay, I can see it now. You see that little yellow line at the very end of Aries there? That's where the part of fortune is. So it gives us a 3 or 4 degree orb between part of fortune and the moon. Now we have it in the 10th house. 10th house is incredibly auspicious. It's going to show a significance of success, of abundance. And so having any exalted planet in the 10th house is going to be very auspicious. So having the part of fortune in conjunction in the sign of Aries, which is very fiery. And we also have the midheaven in direct conjunction. So this is just an incredible combination of what is bound to be a very successful person in their career, or in this case, a film that's going to be very successful in the box office, or very successful as a film in a greater sense beyond just the superficial box office, which might be shown more by the 2nd or 11th house perhaps. But having this much success in the 10th house shows that what the film is trying to achieve, that it achieves in great abundance, in great clarity. So the moon is in the exact degree of the highest exaltation for the entire zodiac at 2 degrees of Taurus, in the 2nd pada of Krittika, which is the earth pada, the earth quarter of it. So, because just like the signs in the zodiac, the padas go fire, earth, air, water, with the same sort of meanings. So we have the earth element within the earth element, in that sense, of this nakshatra within Taurus. And we also have the part of fortune and this fiery energy of Aries also in Krittika. So this film, Taxi Driver, it's very effective at communicating. Unlike Amma, it's not communicating the divine feminine in a direct way, because we have Mars at the towards the end of Taurus. And Mars is in the very end of Rohini, which we'll get to in more detail in a second. So Mars at the end of Rohini, and the moon at the degree of exaltation in Krittika, and then we have the part of fortune there in Aries with the midheaven. What I see in this is there's a message of the divine feminine coming into this film that is all about wild masculine energy, which it is, because that Mars at the end of Rohini is the courageous and ambitious and very abrupt and warlike, or aggressive is the word, at the end of Rohini, which is the most feminine energy part of Taurus. And the moon is in the most masculine part of Taurus, where it's actually exalted. And the reason why that would be exalted is because of this yin-yang principle of balance, that when something is fully in its feminine or fully in its masculine energy, it's inherently imbalanced. And then it needs to find balance somewhere else in the chart, either in an actualized or in a potential state. This is fully actualized, just this small little section of this chart, because you have this Mars that's together with the greatest point of yin within the chart of the final degree of Rohini, where it's the water section of Rohini. So then you have a water mixed with an earth element, and you have Mars there, which is going to be very uncomfortable. And the film is very uncomfortable, but in a way that's incredibly highly elevated aesthetically, which is exactly what Taurus is about. It's about sensual aesthetics being elevated and appreciated. And so having an exalted moon in conjunction with the part of fortune in the beginning of Taurus shows how this is something that's really beautiful to experience. This is a film that myself and other people could watch over and over throughout the years, even though it's a very, I guess, in some ways, violent and disturbing film. It was very controversial when it came out just for its violence. Of course, films have gotten a lot more violent since then, and by today's standards, it's not really that violent of a film, and it's not that disturbing of a film, but it's a very honest film about what it is, about the frustration that you could say the divine or the archetypal masculine energy has around society as it tries to integrate and connect with the divine feminine in this modern society that has so many things out of balance. Another film that's very similar to this that would be interesting to compare the chart of is the film Sin City, where the main character, one of the main characters in it, is talking about how corrupt the city is. And then another film that's similar is Watchmen. I believe both of those are written by the same comic book author. I'm forgetting his name right now. But both of those films have this kind, and Batman, this kind of motif of film noir. That's really also what Taxi Driver is pulling from, is film noir, which came prior, which happened in the 40s and 50s. So that's how Taxi Driver relates to Rohini and an exalted moon. It's how it relates to both what we were looking at there, which was Krittika and Rohini. And that's how Taxi Driver relates to the sign of Taurus. So here, and all of these charts are going to be ascending in degree as far as where the moon is placed. And we're using the moon because it's very important in Vedic astrology. So we have the moon, also still exalted, but slightly less because it's about 5 or 6 degrees away in Krittika now. We're actually looking at the Sigur Rós album. I believe it's pronounced Ágætis byrjun. It's their second album, and it's the one that really put them on the map for the world. And it has a lot of their most famous songs on it. And it's a very original, creative album in the same genre, actually, of a band we covered yesterday, or in the chart of Aries, the video on Aries, in the chart of Talk Talk, Laughing Stock. That was the album that invented post-rock. This is an album that evolved it to a new place about 8 years later, or something like that, in 1999, and started Sigur Rós' career. So this moon in Krittika, again, it's exalted. So it's exalted, reflected beauty. It's the mind of this album is just in a very powerful, fiery presentation, because Amma can channel fiery energy. Taxi Driver can channel this fiery, masculine energy of just raw fire and excitement and interesting things. This album does that as well. And it's happening in Taurus, where everything is very sensual. It's not happening in Aries, like the film Climax that we covered in the Aries video, that's ruled by the sun, and it's ruled by the god of fire, Ágætis. Yeah, so this moon in the fourth pot of Krittika is more mystical. It's the watery part of Krittika. And so and water is really the element of the moons. And this goes really well with Taurus. So this is going to be exalted in a very different way that's more mystical and spiritual with this album, which this album is. It's very mystical and spiritual and mysterious. And it's happening in the 10th house again, which means it's going to be very successful at what it's trying to achieve creatively, if not commercially as well, which this album is. Both. I don't know if this album's ever gone gold or platinum, but the songs on it have been used in a million movie soundtracks, and it's really their calling card as a band. It's where they found their sound. They have an album before this that's not really, that doesn't have anything to do with it. Then the sun in Mrigasharsha, this is our first placement of Mrigasharsha for this video, and that sun is showing that the heart of the album, beyond just what it's trying to achieve mentally, which is something very powerful and beautiful and sensual, the sun shows that it's looking for something really new. And it's because Mrigasharsha is symbolized by this deer in the woods that's looking for this delicious, spiritually uplifting substance called soma. And soma is this intoxicant. It's this form of divinity in a material form that doesn't exist in one form in Mrigasharsha. It exists in many forms. So Mrigasharsha, which is also ruled by Mars, it has this kind of ambitious energy of going out into the woods and trying to collect different things that enliven and inspire and nurture. And so the heart of this album is really an exploring, and there is a style that this album establishes for the band, but actually the differences between the first 2 songs on the album is pretty dramatic. They're both very ethereal and beautiful, but they're also very different. And there is something very deer or doe-like in how the guitars on this album aren't played with a pick. Like in Aries, it's like the cardinal fire, where a guitar would, in Aries, the guitar would be more likely to be played like this, like the way most people play guitar, like Nirvana, like da 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 da. And so in Taurus, now we have the most feminine sign and a fixed sign of just things starting and staying fixed in a direction for a while, and flowing in an earth sign, being grounded. And so the way guitar is played on this album is with a bow, like a violin. So when a note starts, it's not a da that needs to be followed by another series of da da staccato notes. Rather, it's one long sustained note. And so you would have a da 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 da, that kind of thing. And the way that it's sung is very beautiful and very high-pitched and very long sustained notes from all the instruments, except for the drums, of course, which has to play short notes. But even the drums have a softness to it. So there is something very feminine about this album. Also, the lead singer of the band happens to be gay, which would add to the feminine energy of this album and the band. So let's look at the next chart. We might be moving into Rohini at this point. We have. So this is the song/single that has 2 B-sides on it by Aphex Twin called Windowlicker, that came out the same year as that Sigur Rós album. And now we have the moon at the beginning of Rohini. So slightly less exalted, but actually the moon in Taurus period will always be exalted, but it's the most exalted at the beginning of Rohini, in the second pada of Krittika. So the moon at the beginning of Rohini, the first pada of Rohini, the fiery part of it. So this is a very fiery song, despite it being the moon exalted in the feminine sign of Taurus. Aphex Twin is known to have very fiery music, very exciting. This moon is showing up in the 12th house of transformation. Pitchfork made a list a few years ago of the top 100 songs of the 90s, and they put this as #1 because this song is so utterly transformative to what music can be through the use of computers. And we could see this over the last 22 years at this point, since the song came out, basically, that music has transformed tremendously because of computers. And so Aphex Twin is someone who's just going off into the unknown. He's a very experimental, very cutting edge artist, especially back then. And we could see this. I'm not covering any full charts today, of course, but we could just see from what we're looking at that the ascendant for this album, for this song, is in the beginning of Punarvasu in Gemini, which is a sign that's all about a cosmic perspective. And it's in the first pada of Punarvasu, where it's going to also be very fiery. So there's an abundance of this fire element that is also thought of as dharmic. So which means it's Aphex Twin's karma is his dharma. His role in life is to really bring forth new things in very beautiful, transcendent ways. And out of the cosmos with this song, especially because of that ascendant in Punarvasu. And then the moon at the beginning of Rohini shows that there's a very sensual, feminine, seductive aspect and very fertile aspect to this song, because Taurus is about fertility. It's symbolized by the bull, which is a very fertile animal, and Rohini is symbolized by the god Brahma in his form of being, I forget the name of his procreative form that's taken for this sign, but I think there's this relationship between him as, I believe, and then this female goddess that he's wanting to mate with and that he's just enamored with, and eventually they get married, but they actually don't have sex, or live together even. And so that has this other mythological, symbolic, archetypal element to this sign of Taurus and Rohini that I'll get to in a little bit, maybe a little bit now even. But at the beginning of Rohini, that's really expressing more of the initial thrust and passion and dharmic focus that is needed by the moon to really go after something and achieve it. And what it's going after is something very beautiful. And because it's in the 12th house, it's very transformative. And because the moon is exalted here, it's going to be very successful at what it's going after. And because the moon is in Taurus in Rohini, Rohini is ruled by the moon as well. The moon here is highly feminine and sensual, and except it has the fire energy of going after something. So this is a song that goes after sounds that were never even fathomed before it existed. I remember hearing this when it was played at a club I was going to in high school on a Friday or Saturday night, and I just remember everyone being in shock by the music. Also, the music video was insane, but this isn't a chart for the music video. So the song itself was just unfathomably futuristic, and it really still is. One of the greatest modern electronic futuristic producers, A.G. Cook, actually did an entire cover of this song a few years ago, which is impressively true to the original, like note for note and beat for beat, but doesn't really capture just how exactly this song, because this song is like lightning in a bottle. It's a song that maybe eventually AI would be able to cover it and even improve upon it, but until then, this may be just the masterpiece of all masterpieces that the artist Aphex Twin released in their life. It's not my personal favorite thing he's done, but it is certainly the most transformative and explosive thing I think he's ever done in all of those ways I mentioned. And not in an Aries way of just, you see what's going on in Aries here. I won't go into it, but having Venus and Saturn in Ashwini, this is going to in the 11th house. And then having Jupiter in the 10th house with the Sun and Mercury. This is just an incredibly auspicious chart that has a lot of yin-yang balance in it, which you can see because Venus is the most feminine planet in the most masculine sign of Aries, and you have a lot of balance here. It's not just all feminine energy with the moon in Taurus. So let's go on to the next one. We have 2001: A Space Odyssey, the film by Stanley Kubrick that he is perhaps most known for. And we have and there's so much I'm sure we could look at in this chart. But what we're going to look at is Taurus in the 9th house. We have Lilith, the dark node of the moon, going direct, or going ingressing rather than regressing, which it almost always does. So Lilith is ingressing in the beginning of Krittika, while the moon is firmly in the second pada of Rohini, in the center of the chart of 15 degrees. So what all of this means is, I like to read charts going from lower degree to higher degree, whether that's in a sign or with the chart as a whole to some degree, because it's telling a linear story, you could say, from beginning to end. So this Lilith in the beginning of Krittika, it is, let's see, what can we say? Lilith is, this is my first time mentioning Lilith in this series, probably. Lilith, the dark node of the moon, is one of the main indicators in the chart of where trauma and responses to woundedness lies. It is, in a sense, a shadowy aspect of the moon, which is more feminine, which is more unconscious and psychological and emotional. And so Lilith in the fire ruled sign of Krittika, the Agni god of fire ruled sign of Krittika. This is showing right off the bat that there's something that's gone wrong, or there's some kind of reaction to the masculine element that the feminine element of reality is either that is reacting in a neurotic way to, either by withdrawing or becoming obsessively interested in something. So this could denote the film's questioning of humans just continuing just into the future, basically, into more and more technology, more and more tools, more and more space travel, just more of everything. And that's the fiery element, that's the obsession that's coming from early evolution, where things were more brutal in a very clear way, where there were tribes of different monkeys, or not technically monkeys, but pre-Homo sapien creatures that we evolved from. And so in response to the brutality of an age like that, where you have all these predators that you're trying to stay safe from, and the elements, you don't have technologies to protect you, which we all evolved out of, there is this obsessive quality towards going towards more tools, more fire, because when they discover the fire, the first animal, the first monkey that gets a hold of that fire, it uses it to have power and control. And then he's able to basically take over the tribe and then kill a warring tribe, the leader of a warring tribe, with a rock or something like that. I'm forgetting how it all goes down in that thing. But basically, then at the end, he takes a bone and he throws it up in the air, and that bone turns into the spaceship. It's one of the most famous editing cuts in film history. And so Krittika is ruled by the god of fire, and the film starts with literally the invention of fire. And then the film has this direct connection between that desire for more technology to go further, because that was the thing that helped that monkey and its tribe become more powerful and more safe from the elements and warring jealous tribes. And so this is like the human obsessiveness with nuclear weapons. And this film came out during the peak of the Cold War, right around, and just prior to it was the film Dr. Strangelove that was more explicitly about this. But this film is imagining a future where there hasn't been any nuclear weapons dropped, and that have caused setbacks for humanity, and humanity has evolved to this point where they're taking a mission to Jupiter, and they encounter all the really far out science fiction things they encounter in this film with artificial intelligence and perhaps alien life. So all of these topics with Lilith and Krittika, it's very rich with this kind of obsessive focus on tools and fire and creativity and the abundant harvest of Taurus coming into fruition. And then the moon at the very middle of Rohini, this is really the sensuality of the film making itself, and just how beautiful this film is to look at. And it's also, you could see it as outer space, perhaps. We have the midheaven in Punarvasu, which is explicitly ruled by the goddess of space, Aditi, in the 10th house. So that's a very explicit indicator for what the film, where the film takes place and whatnot. But the moon in Rohini, with these films and music and people that on the surface appear more masculine energy, the moon is really indicating the yin energy that's underneath it, which is indicating the balancing element of that fire. And so it's also just indicating the mind. Where's the mind of the film at? It's also indicating the beauty of the film in a very literal cinematography sort of way. It's a very beautiful film to watch. I have a friend who every time this movie plays at a certain place here in Austin on 72 millimeters, is that what that is? He'll go and watch it every time he can because it's just so beautiful to watch on a big screen in high definition, or 72 millimeter, which is an analog high definition. So yeah, I don't think much more needs to be said about this moon placement in Rohini. I think this is a very literal interpretation of, there's more here for sure, but I don't want to get hung up on it because this is a very deep film that kind of requires its own like hour-long or plus video to really analyze, I would say. So next, let's see if we're making it to the third pada of Rohini yet, with Kanye West's album, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, what is considered by many to be his masterpiece. So already we're seeing two masterpieces, or three masterpieces, from Sigur Rós, from Aphex Twin, and now from Kanye West, happening from an exalted moon in Taurus. So that's very interesting. It's a very interesting pattern, as well as the films we're looking at. But these aren't just any albums by these artists. These are the albums that if you go on any website are going to have the highest rating, objectively or subjectively, from tens of thousands of fans. This is the album from Kanye that is the highest rated by critics and fans. And so with that being said, the moon is in the 5th house of creativity, and it's exalted in Taurus. And it's in the feminine sign of Rohini and Taurus with the moon. So the only thing I'll just say about that real quick is, and it's in the 3rd pada. We have gotten to the 3rd pada, which is an air pada. It's the 3 and a 3rd degree section of Rohini that has the air elements in it. And what a pada is actually referring to is also called a navamsha, which is a degree. It's dividing a sign by 9. And so in Sanskrit, nava, that root means 9. Amsha means a subsection of something, a division of something. So it's 9 divisions. And every nakshatra, like Rohini, has 4 of these navamshas in it. And so another way we could look at this on Astrology, I just want to show you something neat here you could do on this website. We could go to the D9 chart, which is the Navamsha chart. And it would take a little bit more explaining for you to fully understand how this all makes sense. But I just want to show you briefly how I mentioned that the moon is in the 3rd pada of Rohini, which is ruled by air. And so if we go to the D9 chart, let's look for the moon in an air sign, and it should be there. Where's the moon? Here it is. It's in Gemini with a bunch of other stuff. And so on the D9 chart, that moon shows up in Gemini, which is an air sign, of course. It's the moving air sign. And so that's how this works. So I just wanted to show you that. It's a neat thing you could do on this website, or on any Vedic astrology software like Kundli, which is an app I use sometimes, or Jagannath Hora, which is a great free PC Vedic astrology app or piece of software that's free. Anyway, a couple tangents there. So let's go back to this Kanye album, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. This album's gonna have so many things going on in the whole chart. It's a very complex, rich album. But let's just look at this moon in Rohini, just zoomed in. Why is the moon in Rohini? Why is the moon in Taurus for this exalted album? The moon is exalted, so it's an exalted sense of beauty and fertility, and this is an album that is there's a lot of sexual themes in it as well. And the 3rd pada of Rohini is going to be one of the most erotic elements because it's a combination of the fire and the water elements of Brahma and I believe the goddess that he marries, that he has this very. So this is, we're getting to that idea of like unrequited love, or a relationship that doesn't quite work out, where there's always this longing to try to merge more. And there's this desire. Like the 3rd pada of any nakshatra is the pada, which is more about desire. And so the desire here is very high. The desire is expressed beautifully on this album as being fulfilled and unfulfilled. And this is very much the essence of Taurus in a nutshell. It's the simultaneous fulfillment and unfulfillment of sensual desires. And in a sense, we could look at the whole zodiac numerologically, starting with Aries as number 1, Taurus as number 2 in a very mystical way, because Aries is the masculine or yang principle of the universe, of cardinal fire, the creation, let there be light, like it says in the Bible. And so this would be symbolized by the number 1. And we can even see how Aries starts from a point on the bottom and goes out to the 2 sides, the 2 curves going out like ears, which are the ram's horns, actually. So that's the 1 going into 2, and the 2 is Taurus. And you can see with Taurus, the 2 things on the top, like antennas, the 2 horns of the bull, this is connected to a circle on the bottom. So it starts with a wholeness, a circle. And this is symbolic of how the feminine principle is numerologically is simultaneously 0 and 2. So we have a 0 there and we have a 2. Whereas for the Aries symbol, we have a 1 that's turning into 2 has an interesting like curving back into itself element, which you could interpret more deeply. But the thing I want to get at here is focusing on Taurus. So essentially, instead of looking at the zodiac as having 12 signs, we could see it at the very start having only 2 signs, because everything that is conceivable in reality, in life, begins with the principle of 2. The principle of oneness, or what is called in Indian philosophy as non-duality, or eta, which means not 2. This is a principle that can't be put into symbols or words, because if you don't have 2, then you don't have anything. You don't have thoughts, you don't have symbols. Begin with 2, because you have to have a symbol as opposed to not having a symbol, or you have to have this symbol as opposed to a different symbol. So there's always a contrast, which means the closest we can get to the expression of what reality truly is in a mystical sense is through duality that starts with the number 2. And so when we look at Aries and Taurus, we could stop right here and do a full reading of any chart theoretically. I've never really attempted to do this by only looking at Aries and Taurus as the whole chart, because they represent all of reality in themselves. And then as we continue to add more signs to the zodiac, like Gemini, Cancer, etc., then we still get more colors, more beauty, more nuance, but it's all here already, because Aries is the number 1, Taurus is simultaneously the number 0 and the number 2, which means the feminine principle is the non-dual principle that exists as the number 0. It's the space that holds the space and is the space where the fire enters, basically. Let there be light is happening within space. And then as that is received by space in a way that can be spoken of and symbolized, that is when the feminine principle is symbolized as the number 2, which is mostly what Taurus is all about. It's all about that number 2. And going into all of this is the essence of why the symbology from the Rig Veda about Brahma wanting to mate with the goddess of speech. And the reason for this is because it's just natural for the god of creation to want to create and have babies. And the woman that he's in love with, that he's infatuated with actually, she is the goddess of speech. And in the form that Brahma takes to try to mate with her is he takes the form of the god of truth. So it's the god of truth being in love with the goddess of speech. So it's this oneness of Aries, because Aries by itself actually is oneness, and it doesn't make any sense by itself until you give it a contrasting element of Taurus, which is the feminine, or the space being held, or the yin to the yang of Aries. So when the god of procreation and the god of truth is trying to mate with the goddess of speech, it's because he wants, symbolically, what this story is saying is that truth wants to be put into words so badly, but she denies him. She, for reasons that I don't want to go into the full story, but she basically turns him down. But then the eventual outcome of all of this is that she says, okay, I will marry you, but we will never have sex and we will never live together. And Brahma agrees to this. And he actually winds up having a different wife that he does have sex with, but that's unrelated to this sign Rohini, or actually it could be related. But this is the part I want to emphasize right now, which is that the moon in this third pada of air, where things flow, where there's a fire-water combination, because when you it's almost like misty. When you put fire to the water element, then it turns into an air-like substance, a vapor. And so Rohini, which is the essence of Taurus, which I feel like is probably the reason why I'm going on so long on this particular chart here. It's that this moon energy it's simultaneously seductive and achieving what it's trying to get, but it's also very elusive, and it's married to this thing that it's so passionate about, but it can also never be with it. That is a symbol saying that the material world can never fully be appreciated. It can never fully be received. There's always more. And this is an album that really gets to the heart of that. So Moon in the third pada of Rohini is about, and the fourth would be the same message, but in more on the receiving end. The air element of Rohini is in this third pada of Rohini here with the moon. So it's an exalted moon expressing both sides of Taurus, where it is fully appreciated and where it's very longed after, because the album begins from a place of Kanye West's, not marriage, but his long-term relationship and exciting times with Amber Rose, and then it's really an album about how that doesn't work out. And then the album ends with him falling in love with Kim Kardashian, and there's this poem at the end of the album that he wrote for Kim that's perhaps the most mystical thing that Kanye's ever written, where he says, "You're my heaven, you're my hell, you're my lies, you're my truth, you're my war, you're my truce." So this is representing that air element, that both sides of the coin, where he's saying Kim is the thing that inspires him, she's the thing that frustrates him. He's just calling her God, basically. He's calling her Brahma. He's calling her the goddess to his God element. So yeah, that's very deep, very powerful, very exalted. Also the fact it's happening in the fifth house of creativity. So yeah, everything is just there for this to be Kanye's most exalted and well-received album of his career. Let's see, I'm going to skip One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, although that's an interesting one. I'm going to skip Star Wars Episode 1. So actually, or maybe let me take a look at that one. It'd be nice to have one in the fourth pada of Rohini, since we covered the first three padas. Let's see, does this one? Yeah, it does, because these are all linear. So this is a movie that was famously a disappointment to fans, but it did make a ton of money, and it did allow the franchise to continue up to the point it is now. George Lucas was able to complete his trilogy. So this album, although a creative disappointment, which maybe we could see more happening with kind of some weird stuff in the fifth house with that Uranus and K2, especially in the end of Shavana, perhaps. But we won't get into that. What we're going to look at is the sun at the beginning of Krittika. So there's a lot of heartfelt passion for this film. And then the moon at the very end of Rohini. This is a film that is embracing new technologies, a lot like the Aphex Twin album or single did. And so the moon is all just about beauty. This is all happening in the ninth house. So the moon at the end of Rohini, it's about mystical principles that Star Wars is always getting at, especially when George Lucas is involved. And when I say mystical, I mean like the hero's journey. The Star Wars film franchise is responsible for popularizing that term, I'd say, that Joseph Campbell came up with. But the moon in the water element of Rohini, in its own sign of Rohini, in Taurus, further away from the exaltation degree, the sun in its own sign of Krittika. So there's not a so the yin-yang balance isn't flowing into each other here, because you have moon in its own sign, Krittika in its own sign. And so that Krittika is going to be really hot. There's going to be this really fiery passion in the heart of George Lucas in the film. And then there's going to be this beautiful imagination of the moon at the end of Rohini, but it's not going to necessarily communicate together in a flowing way. And the moon is further from the exaltation point here. So it's a very beautiful film to look at, actually. And it has one really great scene in it. The pod racer scene is, I think, one of the best, you could say, car chase scenes in any film ever, or certainly one of the best spacey science fiction race scenes ever. It's so much fun. The film as a whole is very convoluted. It's not very well scripted. And so there's a lack of coherence there's a lack of groundedness and coherence in this film that would show up in other parts of the chart. Just real briefly, the Venus in the 10th house in Ardra, that's not a great placement, because Ardra is ruled by Rahu, which is chaotic, and the 10th house wants to be more clear in what it's doing. So the sun in the 10th house, or perhaps Saturn even in the 10th house, Mercury in the 10th house, are going to be very clear communicating something. Ardra is already a nakshatra that is very confused, that's trying to figure things out, and Venus is beauty. So This film is a beautiful mess. That's what Venus in the 10th house and Ardra would say briefly. And then the sun in Krittika shows the passion behind the film. The moon in Rohini shows the beauty of the effects, of the special effects of the film, which really do hold up. A lot of it, like all the beautiful environments underwater and in different planets, are really great. But the story just isn't there, and it's not the best Star Wars film. Okay, so finally, we're looking at 2 more charts. It looks like I have Julianne Moore, the actress's chart. And so I did, for some reason in my databases, it was hard to come up with things that with moon placements in Mrigasharsha at the end of Taurus. All I really came up with was Julianne Moore and Jennifer Lawrence, which, yeah. And then I also have Westworld season 4. But looking at Julianne Moore's chart, so she's an actress. She transforms herself into different roles. Moon is still exalted in Taurus, but now it's in Marisha, which I've explained before. It's all about seeking out new energies. It's not the energy of Ashwini, but it is similar because Ashwini is ruled by Ketu, which we covered in the Aries video. And so we had Daniel Day-Lewis having his moon in Ashwini, where he always wants to start a new project, new roles. Mrigasharsha, which is ruled by Mars, as well as Soma, this essence of beauty being sought in the forest by the doe, the deer, a female deer, in Taurus, the female sign, and Moon, the female planet. And she has her ascendant in Mrigasharsha. So this is a more gentle, seeking out new roles, new projects. You could see Julianne Moore's career as she never went after like superhero or very mainstream franchise roles that I can remember. She was always going after more artistic, specific, very beautifully exalted roles as far as an actress it would look at them as. And the moon at the end of the 12th house would also show an element of tragedy in the roles she would play, and an element for herself where it's like she's always dying to a new character, that she is probably one of those actresses that feels most comfortable when she's acting, and she probably doesn't really feel that comfortable just doing interviews. I haven't seen too many interviews with her over the years. There's a really entertaining one where she acts out a scene from Magnolia, probably my favorite role she played. There's an entertaining clip of her on YouTube with that Billy on the Street guy, and he asks her to act out one of her roles for some people on the street, and it's really funny how she can just do it like just as well she does in the movie on a dime. And she has that Mars passion energy in Punarvasu, which is the ultimate goddess sign as well in a different way. That's the one representing the 0 numerologically, whereas Taurus represents the mystical 2, the receiver of energy and creativity. And yeah, so I don't know, it's just an exalted moon, exalted beauty, seeking out new roles. And in conjunction with her ascendant, it's just she's very interested in doing new things throughout her whole life. And that's a great ascendant and moon sign for her. So she's a double Mrigasharsha, even though one falls in Gemini, one falls in Taurus. But yeah, those placements for Julianne Moore are very auspicious for her as an actress, because she's always going to be doing a new role. She's not going to be a movie star that's recognized for always being the same way. So yeah, that really works well. And Jennifer Lawrence also has these placements. Maybe we could see, if I still have that chart open, how that's similar or different, because she also has her moon in Mrigasharsha. I remember there being a fiery element with her. Yeah, it's her Mars in the most fiery part of Krittika at the end of Aries. It made me think of how she was in that one film was it called Catching Fire? It was one of the Hunger Games movies. Was it called Catching Fire? I never saw any of those movies, but has fire on the cover. Yeah, she has a lot of passion, and her Mars is in the 6th house, which is going to be more challenging with interactions with people, perhaps, or just overcoming obstacles, that she's going to have this huge courage to overcome obstacles. And she has a lot of roles that are all about that. Like, my favorite film she's been in actually might be Joy, a movie you don't hear about too much, where she plays this woman who overcomes odds to become a successful entrepreneur with this invention that she comes up with. It's a hard film to describe why it's so beautiful, but it's directed by a great director who also directed her in 2 other films, Silver Linings Playbook, and I think she was in that one, and then Hustle. So she was great in all 3, but this is the one where she had the most starring role, and I really loved that passion she had in that. So the Maroon in Mrigasharsha for her, it's in the 7th house instead of the 12th. It's not in conjunction with her ascendant like it was for Julianne Moore, but it's still in I guess that's the 2nd pada of Mrigasharsha, which is going to be very earthy. Did Julianne Moore have the 1st or 2nd pada? I didn't identify that. Let's just check it down here. Yeah, she also had the 2nd pada. So we have an apples to apples moon placement here between these 2 actresses. placements. Where did it go? Did I lose it? No, it's down here. Okay, so Jennifer Lawrence in Mrigasharsha, in the Earth part of it, we're just going to say she also likes to play a lot of different roles. It's in the 7th house, so she's going to be more prone to romantic roles, perhaps. As a person, she's going to be a very romantic person. And there's this funny clip on YouTube at some award ceremony where Jack Nicholson pits on her and the way that she swoons in that situation publicly. I'd say very few actresses would feel comfortable showing that side of themselves just publicly like that. So it's very interesting how she's just so authentically herself. And then on another interview, there's another link that YouTube sent me to where I think Jimmy Kimmel was asking her about that, and she said, and asked if she ever went on a date, if she wound up going on a date with Jack Nicholson afterwards, because he sent her like a bunch of flowers, and she said no, and she said it no way. That was funny. Where clearly he's a lot older than her. There's something that seems either a little or a lot creepy about that. You decide if someone 40, 50 years older is hitting on a younger actress and he has a lot of power and blah, blah, blah. Not blah, blah, blah. But there's clearly a power dynamic there that she's responding to, and Jimmy Kimmel's asking her, and she's saying almost in disgust, like, no, it was more of just a fantasy. But the fact that she could show both sides of herself so honestly, this is why she's such a great actress, because you could see all these nuances in her performances. And it's bringing to mind all of the nuance in that incredible performance she had in, what was that movie called? By Darren Aronofsky, Mother. And Moon is the mother sign. So in a way, that's one of the roles she was born to play, is the mother. I won't give away what comes out in that movie, or what is revealed rather, but it's an incredible avant-garde film by Darren Aronofsky where she plays a mother in a house and a lot of crazy surreal things happen. And I don't know, her mind is on doing really creative roles, but she's also, because this is happening in the 7th house, she creates very authentic and nuanced or eclectic, something like that, roles for romances. And I haven't seen too many films that are explicitly romances with her. Oh, actually, what am I saying? Silver Linings Playbook. It's one of the most eccentric romance films I've ever seen, because it's about two people with mental health issues meeting each other and falling in love and finding their own way that is more iconoclastic and eccentric, the way that the relationship unfolds. And so Jennifer Lawrence, quite a bit different from Julianne Moore. Mainly the differences that we noticed came out of this Mars placement, but actually way more than that. It was in the house it was in, where this is a moon in the 7th house instead of the 1st house, which is going to be very different. In fact, it's going to be an opposite element here that is going to have more to do with relationship and the person she's acting in response to in a scene, whereas Julianne Moore just steals the show and is just doing her own thing and people are reacting to her. There's probably something in her chart that's even solar, but with Julianne Moore, I'd say because this moon is showing up in her ascendant sign as well, not the moon, but Mrigasharsha is showing up in her ascendant sign. Mrigasharsha is ruled by Mars. And then there's also a Mars in that 1st house for her. There's a lot more that's fiery in Julianne Moore in a more personal sense, whereas the fire and the passion of Jennifer Lawrence's acting is going to be more in response to others, in a sense. That's what I'm getting out of that. And I could see that as well with her ascendant in Scorpio and some of the placements there, but I'll just leave that alone. So I'm going to wrap this up with a show that you may or may not be watching. In fact, most people aren't. I think ratings have gone down on this show over the years, but I really love this new season of Westworld. It's my favorite season of the show since it started. The 1st season is pretty much perfect, and the 2nd and 3rd, you have their flaws. They kept my interest, but this 4th season, it has some really exciting new plot developments that are very rewarding to anyone who's stuck with the show this far. And so the moon is in the same exact placement as it was for those last 2 actresses. In the 2nd pada, the final 3 degrees of Mrigasharsha, the final 3 degrees of Taurus, in the 2nd Navamsha or pada of Mrigasharsha. So now we've got a 6th house placement. That's the big difference here, other than all the other planets we can see on the periphery. There's a lot of planets here through the 5th and 8th houses. In fact, even in the 4th through 8th houses. So there's a lot to read into there. But the moon in this placement, so there's going to be a lot of different new ideas explored in this season, and they're going to involve conflict. Now, that's such a general description of any show. Any show is going to have conflict and new ideas by the 4th season. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe this is going to be a lackluster one to end on because I don't want to give away any spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen it yet. I'm trying to think of what I can say. The thing that stands out to me is what's going on in the 7th house here. So I'm not really, so this will just be a sneak preview of the next video on Gemini, but we have Lilith together with Venus in Ardra, so that there's a beautiful conflict going on in this season. In fact, I think that's the best way to put it, is that the conflict in this season, there's something very interesting and beautiful about it, because Moon in the 6th house is going to be a mind in conflict. Lilith and Venus in Ardra is going to be a sense of beauty that has conflict and obsessiveness and trauma response involved in it, because Ardra is about conflict and Lilith is about trauma response, Venus is about beauty. Yeah, this 4th season of Westworld and what this moon placement in Taurus is showing me is that there's a very beautiful exalted conflict in this season that I didn't actually feel in the 2nd and 3rd season. And in the first, it'd be interesting to see what the 1st season or the birth chart of the show itself, how that would show up, because the 1st season had a very beautiful, just perfect story, I'd say. But this is a season where the last 2 seasons feel like they've been building up to this one in a way that I'm really looking forward to seeing how this season resolves. So that was a vague interpretation I'll end on there, just because I don't want to give away any spoilers, of course. The main significance here is what an exalted moon in the 6th house looks like in Mrigasharsha, which is there's going to be a lot of different obstacles coming up, because Mrigasharsha is about diversity of things being sought after. In the 6th house, these things are going to be solutions to a problem, lots of different solutions to an obstacle, or lots of different conflicts, or both. Because usually if you have a lot of different solutions, that's to solve a lot of different problems, or trying a lot of different ways to solve one problem. But you're probably going to be successful doing it because the moon is exalted again in Taurus. So we'll end on that note. Thank you for watching this video. I guess I'm just going to wind up making these longer videos. I wanted them to be shorter, but I also like to go more deeply into these things. So if you watched the video this far, thank you for being with me and receiving this information. Please click the like button if you haven't already. That will help me spread the video. And if you're interested in having a reading, I have information for that in my description box. And I'll see you in the next video.